We are so fucking back. Welcome, welcome. All right. So, we shall do the fucking thing. Hi. Ooh, I chose a good time to stream. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all. So, okay, to reiterate, we are going to be reading 3 stories. 2 good ones, 1 bad one. All creepypastas from the early days. So, let's go over to the famous creepypasta section of the official website. Let's go looking. Let's see, we'll go from. Let's see. I'm not reading that. Not reading that. That one's fine, I guess. How long is this one? This is a 10-minute read. But this one's bad. This one's just bad. It's not even entertaining. It's just bad. You know what? I'll do that one. And then we'll do. There's a reboot? There's a Jeff the Killer reboot that was made in 2018? Excuse me? Wait. It is a 34-minute read. Okay, so we read Jeff the Killer the first stream. How would we feel about me reading the reboot that apparently exists? I'm not reading Laughing Track. Lavender Town Syndrome's like okay. Okay. Let's see. Ooh. Ooh. Okay. Found a good one. Found a very, very good one. Y'all will like this one. Mr. Widemouth. Robert the Doll. Why is Robert the Doll categorized as a creepypasta? That's a real life, actual doll. Like, that's not an internet horror story. That's a real, actual doll. Okay, little known fact about me. I used to have an intense hyperfixation on haunted dolls. I used to really want one. I used to read a lot about them. I know a lot about horror dolls. For example, I know a lot about specifically. Okay, the main one y'all know is probably Annabelle, right? So Annabelle is the most I think world famous. Uh, yeah, everyone knows Annabelle. Do you know what she proper looks like? She is a Raggedy Ann doll. She lives in a glass case, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and you cannot touch her. So I say this because like there is a movie based on her, and it was bad. They made her like a stereotypical porcelain ball jointed doll. And it's not even like plausible believability like Chucky. Because at least Chucky originally was like a cute doll. But no, Annabelle in that movie just kind of looked creepy. Yeah, no. She's a Raggedy Ann doll. They're actually really adorable dolls. I would recommend them because they're really fucking cute. What? No way. No way. I did not just fucking find a I found a story on the Creepypasta Wiki of the back rooms. The back rooms is like its whole other thing. That's like calling SCPs creepypastas. Why does that miff me as much as it does? It's because I'm autistic. I've been in the creepypasta fandom since like when was the heyday? It was like 2011, right? Yeah, I've been there since 2011ish, 2012, because I had a really intense fascination with things I technically, quote unquote, should not have been into. Via my guardians, my guardians, specifically the person who was essentially playing the role of my mother, used to watch horror movies in front of me as a little starling, and it messed me up. So I had a mild fascination with horror, but I just don't like horror movies because of that trauma. Okay, we're getting off track. I just wanted to give a little extra time for those who want to tune in, either still here on AniLive or on Twitch. Hello, Twitch. I see you. I know what you are. Uh, so I got three stories for us. We got the Russian sleep experiment, Mr. Widemouth, and Jeff the Killer, the reboot, the 2018 reboot. Ooh, are y'all so excited? I'm excited. All right. And here we have. Hmm. Okay. Let's do this. Y'all so excited? Y'all ready? Our first story is the Russian sleep experiment. This reading will take 12 minutes. Or 20, because I read really fucking slow. All right. 3, 2, 1. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days. Using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of the conversations took over a darker aspect after about the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphone in one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity, with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphone until the second the captives started to scream. The two non screaming captives took the books apart, smearing page after page with their own feces, and plastered them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at the very heavy level of strenuous exercise. I remember watching the story on YouTube. I for real thought this was real. I mean, the way it's framed and it essentially being like written as if you are reading a history book about a war crime, I don't blame you for thinking this was real. I thought it was too when I originally read it as a little starling. Hello, hello, welcome. We're reading the Russian sleep experiment right now. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives because they were afraid they were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphone. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond. "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out amongst the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more responses using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediate voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for their life, of their loved ones to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what that was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state of any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain, allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Hi! Welcome! We're reading the Russian sleep experiment right now. Precisely how much water of the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects. I lost my spot. Precisely all 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscles and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten in the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but many still refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. Hi, welcome. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects pulled a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having... Do I have to read that? Hello, people who are listening, who have Hello, everyone in this chat that has balls. I'm so sorry for what's about to happen to you. Okay. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the test subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him but it proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one of the doctors. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continued begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken into only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare for the surgery. Welcome, welcome. We're reading the Russian sleep experiment. He fought furiously against his restraints. When the amnesiac gas was brought out and put him under, he managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. Hi, welcome. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force of his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react to the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to recover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon proceeding stated repeatedly that it should have been medically possible for the patient that it should have been medically impossible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several eyes whenever his eyes met hers. Welcome, welcome. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well. Although they had been injected with a paralytic for duration of the operation, the surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their systems in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given. Determination as to what they should do with them. The researchers facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their subjects, considering euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commander officer, as former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were to be put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. Hi, hi. One of the subjects that continued to speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired from EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatline inexplicably. It looked like he was repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning back to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same time his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave an order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. I won't be locked in here with these things! Not with you! He screamed at the man strapped to the table. What are you? He demanded. I must know! The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go into a nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined and the subject weakly choked out. So nearly free. That was the Russian sleep experiment. Such a good read. Video Master, welcome. Welcome everyone. So, hi. You just missed Russian sleep experiment, but I'm sure you can find the VOD once we're done here. We have 2 more stories. So, you're not missing out on much. Don't worry. You made it just in time. So, dear Starlines, our next story is Mr. Widemouth. It's a shorter story, only 6 minutes. If we have enough time, I'll read one more story after the Jeff reboot. But that might be a bit, considering the Jeff reboot is 34 minutes. So, here we go, Chad. My little Starlines. Are you ready for some spookies? I'm sure you are. All right. 3, 2, 1. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. Yeah, someone made a Jeff the Killer reboot. It's from 2018, and we're going to be reading it. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8. Then we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. You call that not being in one place? Buddy? Oh wait. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to various homes we had lived when I was much younger. Okay, there you go. I was about to say, you call that being, like, traveling? My guardian, when I was still a little starling, used to move, like, once a year. So, like, lol. Anyway. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float to the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remain as clear as glass as I thought they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they were real. Once a year, never settled in one place. That must have been rough. It stopped once I hit double digits. Um, that's when we finally started like staying in one place, and that's where I reside now. Okay, but in my heart, I know these are real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population 643. It was a large structure specifically for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house in the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and they served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. My bad. Hi. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I got diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body, his head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Phoebe? What's a Phoebe?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy. The little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them almost like a real pet." "Oh." Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They're not the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me. "I lay under your bed," he later explained. "I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore." He didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. "I have a new game we can play," he said. "You have to wait until after your mother comes to check in on you because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game." After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. "We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway," he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me from leaving my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out the ground below. We were on the 2nd story of the house, but it was on a hill, and this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories in the incline. "I like to play picnic here," Mr. Widemouth explained. "I bet that there's a big soft trampoline below this window, and when I jump, if you put the hand hard enough, you'll bounce up like a feather. I want you to try." I was 5-year-old fever, so the only skepticism directed my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said. But that's all part of the fun. It would be fun if it was a really short drop. If it was that way, it was bounce on a real trampoline. I totally would be a good idea. Picturing myself falling in thin air bounce back through the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realistic prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Whiteout's face turned into a smile, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. Here's some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons. I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me! I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'd be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. I can't. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. I pushed the knives away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started to have trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed up by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so much fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. I have something I want you to see, he said. I must have given him a weird look because he then said, It's safe, I promise. I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. This is an important path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there. I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit. Despite what he said otherwise, so for within this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow to help with an endless supply of coffee and 6 packs of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? He asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn on the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belong to children. And that was Mr. Widemouth. So, short and sweet. Honestly, not bad. Really not that bad at all. So, ooh, you know what? That's really funny. I should do it. I should do it. I should. Hi, welcome. So, that was Mr. Widemouth. And now, it's time. So, okay. I pulled up another story since we're actually blazing through these really fast. I pulled up 2 stories and I want y'all to help me decide which one we're doing next. So, our options. 2 options. We have Tiki Toby. That is about 17 minutes in length. Or the Jeff the Killer reboot, which is about 34 minutes in length. Both of them are, I don't know how the quality of Jeff the reboot actually is. I haven't actually read it before. But I know the quality of Tiki Toby, and it's a B. It's a B. In a tier list. It's a B tier. Kind of interested in the first one. Tiki Toby. Tiki Toby, I want some nostalgia. You know what? Yeah. Okay. We'll do Tiki Toby, and then we'll round everything off with Jeff the Killer. Again. All right. Tiki Toby. Written by Castaway. Okay, let's do this shit. The road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to stretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the trail green trees danced across the window in random patterns and every once in a while obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surroundings were full of deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound was the sound of the car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful enough to serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every form of nice for its 2 passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat, short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamonds studded earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially shone from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which her shirt brought out, and the lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't anything significant about her appearance. She looked like every other average mother you would see on TV shows and the like. However, the thing that made her different is that the average mothers had the only thing that made her different than the average mothers were the dark bags she had under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she was genuinely looking like someone who smiled a lot. She would sniffle every once in a while and occasionally glance in the rearview mirror to look at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially with his arms held tight around his chest and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance, or anyone could plainly see that there was something wrong with him. His messy brown hair went every which way, and the luminescent lighting brought out his pale, almost gray skin. His eyes were dark, unlike his mother's, and he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided to him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and blood-stained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with a split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged all the way to the shoulder, which had been shredded when his right side hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful, when in reality he couldn't feel anything. This was just one of the glories of being him. Hi, welcome. One of the challenges he had to face when growing up was growing up with a rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards pain. Never before has he felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing. The other major disorder he faced, which was the one that deemed him many insulting nicknames in the short time he attended grade school before he switched to homeschooling, was his Tourette's syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and call him Ticky Toby, and they mocked him with exaggeratory twitching and laughing. It got so bad he had to turn to homeschooling. It was too far for him to be in a common learning environment, which seemed like every kid poking, more like stabbing, fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window, his face empty of any emotion, and every few minutes his shoulder, arm, or foot would twitch. Every bump that car tires hit would make his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding in a car when it crashed. That's all he thought about, unconsciously replaying everything he remembered before he blacked out, over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one. His sister had not been so lucky. When the thought of his sister came, he couldn't help the tears that welled in his eyes. The horrible memories were played in his mind. Her screaming that had cut off in the front of the car was smashed in. It went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body. Her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs crushed under the force of the steering wheel, and her torso pushed in from a too late inflated airbag. That was the last thing he had seen of his dear older sister. The road continued for what seemed like forever. It took so long for them to get home because his mom wanted to avoid the sight of the crash. When the surroundings gave way of a familiar neighborhood, they were both more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own home. It was an older neighborhood with quaint little houses all next to each other. The car drove in front of a blue house with white window panes. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle that parked in front of the house and a familiar figure that stood in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father. His father, who wasn't there. His mother pulled the car up in the driveway beside him before turning off the engine and preparing to step out and face her husband. Why is he here? Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother, who reached open the car door. He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you. His mother responded in a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. You can drive up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died. Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive. Yeah. When is he not? Toby pushed the door open before his mother and stumbled out of the driveway when he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and started leading him inside. Connie, her husband began in a raspy voice. What, no welcome home hug, huh? She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. Hey, he's 16. He can walk by himself. His father began to follow them in. He's 17. Connie glared back at him before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. Toby, why don't you get to your room and rest? Toby, why don't you get into your room and rest, okay? I'll come get you when dinner's ready. No. I'm 16. I can walk myself, Toby said sarcastically, and he glared back at his father before stumbling up the staircase and turning to his room where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and his walls had a few picture frames of his family, back when they were a family, before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently towards the rest of his family. Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mom, and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her in the floor, and when Lyra had tried to break it up, he pushed her, and she hit the back of the she hit her back on the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him for what he did to his mother and sister. Never. Toby didn't care how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What he did care about was how he intentionally hurt the two people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital where his sister took her last breaths, the only one who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood by the window and looked out the street. He could have sworn he saw something out in the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the meds he was on. When dinner time had come and his mother called up to him, Toby came downstairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and in between his mother, in an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked up their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. I lost my spot. His mother caught onto his staring and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly and then down to his uneaten food, which he still didn't touch. Toby let it be. He put his covers over his head and stared at the window. Hi. He couldn't. He was tired. Welcome, Mothman. He was tired, but there was no way he would fall asleep. He couldn't. There was too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father, or continue to hold a grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open and his mother padded into the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which had been turned to her. Okay. Here. Okay. I know it's... Sorry, I had to read something just now. It was kind of important. I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me. I understand. But I promise you it will get better, she said softly. When is he going to leave? Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall to her feet. I don't know, honey. He's staying, as far as I know, she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out the room. Good night, she said as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screaming of tires, the screeching of tires, the screaming of his sister, and he would uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his cover, and lying on his back, he pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press the pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly, tears streaming from his eyes. He couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't stop the whining and whimpering as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. He rubbed his eyes and looked out at the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, as his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the streetlight. He heard ringing in his ears and couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it did, long arms draped at its sides as it stared up at him with its non-existent eyes. The figure had no facial features to speak of. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder each second he stared before suddenly it all went black. The next morning, Toby woke in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all, and when he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over the wall, but when he stood up, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs. His parents were sitting at the table. His father was tuned into the small TV that sat on the countertop, and his mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence longing behind her. Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever. She greeted him with a hesitant smile. Toby looked over at the clock and noticed it was 12:30 p.m. I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed sleep. Her expression fell from happy to worried as her son resided next to her. Resisted responding to her. Are you all right? Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on idle and had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but it didn't register in his brain properly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. Don't touch me, boy, he yelled. His mother stood up. All right, knock that off. That's the last thing we need. The day went by, and things continued on as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by the bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He would pace around his small room like a caged animal and stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Hi, welcome. We're reading Tiki Toby. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw at his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. Hi. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid kit, wrapping his hands in bandages. Afterwards, she demanded that he wouldn't leave her side again. Toby isolated himself so much that he grew to hate being around others. His memory grew. Why do you gotta describe it like this? His memory grew glitchy as well. He started missing memories of minutes, hours, days, and so on. This is called having a dissociative disorder. Maybe you've heard of it? This is very much a dissociative disorder. It's not glitching in your memory. I mean, I guess you could call it glitching if you didn't know what this was, but this is very much a dissociative disorder. He's on autopilot. He's losing chunks of memory. He's not fully there. His brain is going 100 miles a minute. This is dissociative. This is dissociative behavior. Oh, Percy, how do you know this? I suffer from a dissociative disorder. I would know. Okay, so he would begin talking nonsense about things completely unrelated to the conversations he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in the sink as he washed the dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. Schizophrenia? I mean, can Slenderman give you schizophrenia? Or at least give you schizophrenic-like symptoms? Because I think that's what's going on here. Yeah, he can. Paranoia. Oh, yeah, no, for sure. This is very much as well paranoia because he's also talking to himself and having fidgets and twitches of worry. Hi. The I think what's going on here is that Toby is experiencing disassociation and schizophrenia. It's kind of evident the author either didn't know what they were writing or they had experience in this and did not know what the words were for it. Because the way this is framed, this is textbook definition Disassociation and schizophrenia. Okay, let's continue. His mother grew so anxious about his mental health that she decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked up to him to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind him. Hey, Miss Rogers, the lady asked. Yes, that's me, Connie nodded. We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers. Yes, right this way. The lady stood up and led him down the long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and turned to the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door. It could be that Toby himself doesn't have the words for it either, since he's the focus of the story. Good point. It's just that I'm gonna say what I did as well as with I said with Jeff. You can tell that this is written by a teenager, and they're trying to tackle mental health topics that they're both not all too versed in, or they are experiencing, but don't have the words for. Which then, yes, would make sense since Toby in the story is 17. So I guess I can be a little bit forgiving, but I'm still gonna be a little bit picky because I'm a slightly experienced writer. So, you know. Kaito! Kaito finally fucking yeah! Kaito! Kaito's debuting! Finally! Oh, I'm so excited for you guys to meet them. They're so nice. Kaito's debuting soon on the 22nd. Y'all better be there. Y'all better be there. I'm not gonna stream that day. Y'all better be there. You better. You better. Yeah. Yeah. Y'all better be there. Excuse me. I had a yawn. Okay, here we go. She opened the door to the room to a table with two chairs. If we can get him to sit here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor. She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the door and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands. But he was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman with a black and spotted dress with light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and pen. Toby? She asked with a smile. Toby looked over and nodded. Nice to meet you, Toby. My name's Dr. Oliver. She put her hand out to him to shake, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. Oh. She smiled nervously, before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay? She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby noticed slowly and held his restrained hands in his lap. How old are you, Toby? 17. He responded quietly. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. What's your full name? Toby Aaron Rogers. When's your birthday? April 28th. Do we share a birthday? Wait. No, my birthday is off by 2 days. That's crazy. Who's in your immediate family? Toby paused for a moment before answering her question. My mom, my dad, and... He stopped. My sister. I heard about your sister, dear. I'm real sorry. Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby? Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap, and in the surrounding area, he heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened, and he froze in place. Toby, the counselor asked. Toby, are you listening? Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again, slowly looked over at the little window through the door where he saw it. A dark, featureless figure peering in on him. He stared, eyes widened, and the ringing grew louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice of the counselor broke his trance. Toby! She yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and backed into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes, his breath hitching as he twitched. That night, Toby laid in bed. His eyes were dazed as he stared straight up into the ceiling. Hi, welcome. He could feel himself beginning to doze off when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. Hi. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the door when suddenly the door, which previously was wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground and he began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back on his feet. He reached out and grabbed the cold door handle with his bandaged hand, and it creaked open. There's a typo right there that threw me the fuck off. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up in the darkness with blue moonlight as he padded his way down. He could hear footsteps rustling around him and faint giggling followed by pitter-patters of small feet, which sounded like a child had run in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot darker than he remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard a door creak in front of him. Mom? He called in a shaky voice. Suddenly a door slammed behind him and he jumped and turned around. Behind him he heard a long, eerie groan that sounded like a croak right in his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, the right side of her jaw dangling there by tissue and muscle glass protruding from her forehead, black blood leaking down her face, her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it always was. She was wearing her gray t-shirt and athletic shorts, which were dirtied and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood emanating a long, croaking noise only an inch away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. He started to crawl backwards away from her, but he was unable to break the eye contact he held with her blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure, the same figure that stood over him now. Behind the tall, dark mass were rows of children. Behind the tall, dark mass, looking to range from 3 to 10 years old, their eyes completely black and dark blood leaking from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by the dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight to his stomach and got the wind knocked out of him. He tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went to black. Toby woke with a start. He screamed out and sat up as fast as he could, completely short of breath. He wheezed out and held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He lay back down on his bed and rolled over on his side. It felt like against weight had been lifted off his chest as he took in deep breaths. He stood up and patted over his window. He saw nothing. Nothing was out there. No ghosts, no figures, nothing. Hear the rustling and coughing of his father outside the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it, looking out into the hallway once again. He padded down the hallway and into the kitchen, where he found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited for a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep, boiling anger overtook him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. Do it. Do it. Do it. They chanted. He turned away and held his arms. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike he did for the past few weeks since they got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just moments before the chanting of little voices in his head continued to cloud them. Do it. Kill him. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. Kill him. Kill him. Hi. We're reading Tiki Toby. We're almost done. They continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. Was he going crazy? No, he wouldn't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but there was no way he was going to kill him. That was it. That was the last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influence of the voices in his head was too much. He began to silently walk over behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife in the case. He gripped it in his hand. He felt the sensation take over his chest. He let out a snicker. Hey, you guys want to hear me crazy laugh again? I know some of y'all are new. You haven't heard me crazy laugh before, but I can do it. Are y'all ready? Okay. Hopefully I can actually do it because my throat is killing me. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt a brute force shove him to the floor. He grunted as the air was knocked out of him. What? He looked up at the boy who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in his hand. Toby, what are you doing? He went to sit up and put his arms out in front of him in his self-defense, but before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He went to grab his neck, but his father reached out and blocked his hand by grabbing onto his wrist. Stop! Get off of me, you little fucker! He yelled, and with his other hand, he threw an off-center punch towards Toby's shoulder, but he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes was not sane. It looked as if a demon had taken control of him. He yelled back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but his father blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went to shove him back, but Toby kicked his feet out in front of him and landed a hard blow straight to his father's face. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went to pull the knife out. Before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fist into his face. Laughing and wheezing, he cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped out of his father's shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and repeatedly stabbed into his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his father's smashed-in face and sat there twitching until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that?" she cried. "Why?" Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. He looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on his hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out of the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his hand against the control panel of the wall and pushed the button to open the garage door. Before he ran out, he noticed his father's hatchets, which had been hanging from the tool rack above a table full of jars filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One of the hatchets was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. And the other was an old one with a wooden handle and an old dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table, and he saw a box of matches. Another table was a red gasoline tank. He held both of the hatchets in one hand and grabbed the matches and gasoline before running out of the garage, down the driveway, and up in the street. As he approached the streetlight that he could see out his own bedroom window, he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around, and the red and blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before he pulled open the cap of the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street after him. He turned and ran into the trees. He poured the last bit of gasoline out before he reached into his pocket, pulled out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, the flames burst around him. The fire caught on the trees and bushes around him, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by fire. The silhouettes of police cars were visible through the flames as he backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred. His heart was pounding, and he closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see a large white hand with long, bony fingers resting on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand to a dark, towering figure. It appeared Toby was wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame as it looked down at him. Tendrils reached out from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred, and he heard the sound of ringing in his ears. That was it. That was the end. That was how Toby Rogers died. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son, and a few weeks before, she had lost her daughter in a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy as they just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago. The focus of the story seemed to have shifted to completely new stories. Lori shifted the TV to the news broadcast. On the TV, news reporters began to introduce the new headline. We have breaking news. Last night, there have been reported of murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet, but the victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kids have been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators have discovered a weapon in the crime scene. It appears to be an old, dull blade hatchet, as you can see here. The picture changed to show snapshots of the weapon exactly as it was left on the crime scene. Investigators have pulled the same name of a possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who stabbed his father to death a few weeks ago and tried to cover up his escape by setting fire in the streets and forest around the neighborhood. Although they believe the young boy had died in the fire, investigators suspect Rogers might still be alive due to the fact his body was never found. Oh, fuck. So my phone's at 1%. We gotta end this quick. Thank you guys so much for attending. I hope Tiki Toby, Mr. Widemouth, and the Brush and Sleep Experiment, and I think we read another one. No, we didn't read another one. It was all 3. I hope that was good. All right, I'm gonna let my phone charge now. Bye-bye, everyone.